is Joel Mercer, and I'm going to tell you how my wife's family used a $14.2 million inheritance to try to erase 9 years of my life, and how the very legal document they drafted to protect themselves handed me $4.7 million and a second chance I never expected. 8 months ago, I was eating a gas station sandwich in the parking lot of a Marriott Courtyard in Knoxville, Tennessee, trying to figure out how a man who'd done everything right could end up with nothing. Today I run Mercer Home Services, the fastest growing residential HVAC company in East Tennessee, with 16 employees and more contracts than I can handle. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm 47 years old. I spent the better part of 2 decades building something honest. Started out as an apprentice HVAC tech at 19, working under a guy who'd been doing it since the Carter administration. He taught me to take pride in the work. Not the kind of pride you talk about. The kind that shows up when nobody's watching. I eventually got licensed, built my own small client base on the side, and by the time I was 35, I was running service operations for a regional company out of Maryville. Good money, not great money. The kind of income where you budget carefully, take vacations every other year, and feel genuinely proud that you own your house outright. My wife, Celeste, I met at a mutual friend's cookout the summer of 2015. She was laughing at something her sister said when I first saw her. That's the image I still carry. Not the wedding, not any of the anniversaries, just that laugh in somebody's backyard on a Saturday afternoon. She was warm and sharp, and she made everything feel easier than it was. Her family, the Aldridges, were from Chattanooga old money. Her father had built a commercial real estate empire starting in the 1980s, the kind of business that grows quietly for 40 years until suddenly it's worth something serious. They weren't flashy about it. They didn't need to be. Her father, Walter, was cordial to me in the way that powerful men are cordial to people they've already dismissed. He shook my hand at every family dinner. He remembered to ask how work was going, but there was always a half-second delay before he answered anything I said, like he was deciding whether the comment was worth engaging. Her mother, Rosalind, was warmer on the surface but colder underneath. She had a talent for compliments that left you feeling smaller. "Joel, you are so practical," was one of her favorites. Her older brother, Trent, was the worst of the three. He ran a division of the family company and had the particular arrogance of someone who'd inherited his position and spent 20 years convincing himself he'd earned it. They never outright said I wasn't good enough. They didn't have to. It lived in the pauses, in the way Trent would redirect conversations about business towards Celeste, as if I wasn't in the room, in the way Rosalind once referred to Celeste's first apartment, the one she lived in before we met, as "when you were on your own." 9 years of marriage and I was still being described as a temporary condition. Celeste worked as a project coordinator for a nonprofit that did housing advocacy. She loved it. It paid around $38,000 a year, which she always said was beside the point. Her family's trust fund handled the gap. We'd agreed early on that her trust money was hers. I didn't want to build a life on income I hadn't earned. Everything we built together came from my work and whatever she contributed from her salary. Joint account, shared expenses, no drama. That part of our marriage worked fine. What I didn't fully appreciate, until it stopped mattering, was how much the Aldridge family's opinion of me had been slowly working on Celeste for years. It's not that she didn't love me. I believe she did for a long time. But when you spend 9 years hearing in small and large ways that your husband is a ceiling rather than a ladder, eventually that starts to feel like the truth. In March of last year, Celeste's great-uncle passed away in Savannah, Georgia. His name was Bernard Aldridge, and he'd spent 60 years as a maritime attorney with investments scattered across the Southeast. He was 91. He had no children. His estate after probate came to $14.2 million in liquid assets and property holdings. He left it to Celeste, not to her parents, not to Trent, to Celeste specifically, with a note in the will that said he'd always believed she was the only one in the family who understood what he'd actually worked for. I never met Bernard Aldridge, but based on that note, I think I would have liked him. The call came on a Tuesday evening in late March. I was under the kitchen sink fixing a slow drain when Celeste walked in and stood in the doorway without saying anything. I knew something was wrong from the way she was holding her phone. She told me what happened. I sat up and hit my head on the cabinet door, and neither of us laughed. We just sat there in the kitchen while she explained the numbers. $14.2 million. Her name. Her alone. I asked if she was okay. She said she didn't know. I should have paid closer attention to what she meant by that. Over the next 6 weeks, things shifted in ways I kept telling myself were just stress. She started taking calls in other rooms. She flew to Chattanooga twice without fully explaining why. When I'd come home, I'd sometimes catch the end of a conversation that stopped the moment I walked in. I told myself it was estate stuff, legal complexity, family politics, Aldridge family drama that I was better off staying out of. Then one Sunday morning in May, I came downstairs and found her sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. She looked like she'd been up all night. She told me she needed to talk about our future. That phrase, our future. The way she said it told me immediately there wasn't one. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking, that she felt like she'd spent the last several years not being fully herself, that the inheritance had clarified something for her about what she wanted her life to look like. She said it carefully, without cruelty, like she'd rehearsed it. That was almost worse. I asked her if there was someone else. She said no. I believe that was true. I asked if this had anything to do with her family. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I think I need to figure out who I am outside of this. I moved into the Marriott courtyard 4 days later. Celeste filed for divorce in June. What happened next is where the Aldridge family made a mistake. They'll spend a long time thinking about. Her father, Walter, her mother, Rosalind, and Trent flew in from Chattanooga within 2 weeks of the filing. I found out later they'd also brought their family attorney, a man named Philip Graves, who'd been handling Aldridge legal affairs for 30 years. They were worried. Not about Celeste. About the money. Tennessee is an equitable distribution state, not a community property state. What that means is a court divides marital assets in a way considered fair, not necessarily 50-50. Inherited money is generally treated as separate property, not subject to division. The $14.2 million, under most readings of Tennessee law, was Celeste's alone. I knew this. I'd already spoken to an attorney. But the Aldridges didn't trust most readings. They wanted certainty, and that's where they overreached. Philip Graves drafted what he called a postnuptial asset clarification agreement. It was designed, he explained to Celeste, to formally establish that the inheritance was entirely her separate property in writing, signed by both parties, filed with the court. It would eliminate any ambiguity. Clean. Airtight. The problem was the clause on page 4. I almost missed it. My attorney, a woman named Christine Hadley who works out of a small office in West Knoxville and does not miss things, caught it immediately. She called me and read it to me over the phone. I had to ask her to read it again. The clause stated that in the event of a divorce, any marital assets that had been commingled with the inheritance funds, any money from joint accounts used for expenses related to the estate, including legal fees, financial consultations, property management during probate, and shared household costs during the period of inheritance administration, would be subject to reimbursement from the inheritance at a rate of 3 times the documented commingled amount. Philip Graves had been so focused on protecting the inheritance that he'd written a clause requiring triple reimbursement for marital funds spent in support of the estate. It was meant to be a shield for Celeste. He'd accidentally built a gate that opened from my side. Christine advised me to sign it. I signed it. Here's what the Aldridges hadn't accounted for. In the 6 weeks between the inheritance announcement and Celeste's divorce conversation, I had been a functioning husband. I'd driven her to 2 attorney appointments. I'd taken a week of PTO to help her manage the logistics of the Savannah property walkthrough. We'd used our joint account for everything: gas, meals, a hotel night in Savannah, a financial advisor consultation fee. I had receipts for all of it because I am, at my core, a man who keeps documentation. 20 years in the licensed trade will do that to you. Every receipt, every mileage log, every calendar entry. The commingled amount from our joint account totaled $11,400. 3 times $11,400. 3 times $11,400. 3 times $11,400 is $34,200. That's not the number that mattered. What mattered was what Christine found when she pulled the full probate records and cross-referenced them with the estate's administrative timeline. Bernard Aldridge's attorney in Savannah had billed the estate for correspondence fees. Some of those correspondence fees were for calls with Celeste. Those calls had occurred on dates when Celeste and I were still living together in our home, which meant the estate had been actively administered during the marriage, using our shared household as a base of operations. Under the language of the agreement Philip Graves had drafted, that period of estate administration overlapped with our marital household for 61 days. Christine wrote a 17-page letter to Graves's firm. The Aldridge family's response was to hire a second law firm. Their response to that firm's advice was to hire a third. By October, we were in front of a Chancery Court judge in Knox County. Philip Graves looked like a man attending his own sentencing. Trent, sitting in the gallery, spent most of the hearing staring at the floor. Rosalind wasn't there. Walter was, and to his credit, he sat up straight the entire time. I'll give him that. The judge took 11 days to issue his ruling. Christine called me on a Wednesday afternoon when I was pulling a service van back into the lot. I sat in the driver's seat and didn't get out for 20 minutes after she finished talking. $4.7 million. Not from the triple reimbursement clause alone. The court also found that certain estate-related financial decisions Celeste had made during the marriage, specifically the transfer of a small parcel of Savannah property into an account that had previously held joint funds, had created a limited commingling situation that the agreement's language directly addressed. The Aldridges had written a document so eager to protect everything that it had inadvertently claimed jurisdiction over transactions they never meant to include. The ruling also addressed the attorney's fees. Given the conduct of the opposing counsel, the successive law firms, the procedural delays, the failed motions to have the agreement invalidated, the judge ordered the Aldridge estate to cover a significant portion of my legal costs. Christine told me later that Philip Graves had amended his retirement date. I want to be honest about something because I think it matters. I didn't see this coming when I signed that document. I didn't sign it as a trap. I signed it because Christine told me to, and I trusted her, and the agreement seemed fine on its face. The outcome surprised me. What didn't surprise me was that the Aldridge family's first instinct, when real money appeared, was to protect it at any cost, including from a man who'd spent 9 years being part of their family. That's what I think about, not the money. I think about the Sunday dinners where Walter talked over me, the Christmas where Trent made a comment about blue-collar sensibilities and Celeste didn't say anything, the way Rosalind once introduced me at a charity function as Celeste's husband, with a half-beat pause before husband that lasted about 9 years. They tolerated me when I was harmless. When real money showed up, they dropped the pretense within 2 weeks. You treated me like furniture until it was time to rearrange the room. I said that to Christine over coffee after the ruling, and she wrote it down. I don't know why. Maybe she collects good lines. Celeste and I have not spoken since the ruling. I don't hate her. I've spent a lot of time making sure I don't, because hate is a thing that eats the wrong person. What I feel is something closer to grief, for a version of things that I think I believed in longer than she did. She still has roughly $8.9 million, minus legal costs, minus whatever she's done with the Savannah property. She's fine. She'll be fine. She's an Aldridge. With my settlement, I paid off the service van I'd been leasing, rented a small commercial space in West Knoxville, and hired 4 technicians I'd worked with before who I knew were reliable. I spent 3 months building out the operations, software, scheduling systems, supplier relationships, the kind of administrative infrastructure that lets a business run without you standing in the middle of it every second. I called the company Mercer Home Services because I wanted something that had my name on it. Just mine. Within 4 months, we had more residential HVAC contracts than we could reasonably handle. I brought on a 5th tech, then a 6th. We added plumbing services in September. We're bidding on a commercial contract right now that would be the largest single job I've ever run. I'm not telling you this to sound impressive. I'm telling you this because I spent 9 years worrying that the Aldridges were right, that I was a ceiling, that I would always be the guy eating a gas station sandwich in a parking lot, wondering how it went wrong. Turns out I was just in the wrong building. The thing I learned that I'll keep: document everything. Not because you're planning for the worst, because the worst sometimes plans for you. Keep your receipts. Log your mileage. Note the dates, not out of suspicion or bitterness, just because the record of what actually happened is the only thing that belongs entirely to you when everything else is being disputed. Money reveals who people are. It doesn't change them. The Aldridges were always people who believed their wealth entitled them to decide which relationships counted. The inheritance just gave them a reason to stop hiding it. I'm not angry about that anymore. I'm something better than angry. I'm busy. If you've ever sat across from a family that looked at you like you were temporary, like you were a phase their daughter or son was going through, like your work and your years and your presence in their lives didn't quite add up to something real, then you already know how this story felt before it ended. And if you're still in the middle of yours, I want you to hear this. Keep your documentation and find yourself a Christine Hadley. The rest has a way of working out. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in that chancery court, and the more I sit with it, the more I think the outcome had less to do with luck than it did with the choices people made over a long period of time. Choices that accumulated quietly until they couldn't be ignored anymore. Walter spent 30 years building something real. I respect that. What he never figured out is that the habits you use to build wealth, the assumption that money is the measure of a person, that influence determines outcome, that the right attorney can rewrite reality. Those same habits have a way of turning on you when you apply them to the wrong situation. He treated the inheritance the way he treated everything else, as a transaction to be controlled. He brought in Philip Graves, brought in the paperwork, brought in the certainty of old money protecting itself, and Philip Graves, trying to be thorough, wrote a clause so aggressive it wrapped around and pointed the wrong direction. That's not bad luck. That's what happens when you're so confident your position that you stop reading carefully. I didn't win because I was smarter than the Aldridge family. I won because Christine Hadley read page 4 and because I had kept 11 months of receipts in a folder on my phone the way I keep documentation on every job I run. Not because I suspected anything, just because that's how I was trained to work. You document the foundation before you pour the concrete. You don't wait until something goes wrong to start keeping records. That habit came from 20 years in a trade, not from any strategy or cunning. It just turned out to matter enormously at exactly the right moment. There's something I think is worth saying directly. Integrity compounds. Not in a way you can see day to day. It doesn't feel like anything while it's happening. But 9 years of showing up honestly, 9 years of not touching Celeste's trust money, 9 years of keeping clean records and doing the work without shortcuts, all of that became the foundation the court ruling stood on. I didn't manufacture credibility in that courtroom. I just showed up with the receipts of who I'd already been. On the other side of that, there's Trent sitting in the gallery staring at the floor. And I don't take pleasure in that image. I really don't. But there's a lesson in it that I think matters. The way you treat people when you believe you hold all the advantages is exactly the record that gets read back to you when you don't. Every dismissive comment, every redirected conversation, every pause before the word husband. That wasn't invisible. It was a pattern. And patterns have a way of becoming evidence. What I carry out of this isn't the $4.7 million, though I won't pretend that didn't change my life. What I carry is a cleaner understanding of what I'm actually building toward. Mercer Home Services exists because I had a foundation that didn't depend on anyone else's opinion of me. I knew how to do the work. I knew how to manage people and systems and logistics. The Aldridges spent 9 years seeing a ceiling. I was the whole time building the floor. If there's anything I'd want someone to take from all of this, it's just that: do the work, keep the records, and don't let someone else's assessment of your value determine how seriously you take yourself. The rest has a way of catching up eventually, in one direction or the other.